Earlier this week, I put up a video about ghost tours and how people go on ghost tours this time of year because it's Halloween. And I expressed a very dismissive, very negative attitude toward ghost tours and toward the supernatural just in general. And I think for folks who didn't already know that that's how I felt about that, it was kind of a surprise maybe, or they felt like I was being a little too harsh, or they even would ask, like, what's your problem with ghost tours? Why are you being so harsh? Why don't you know that it's all meant to be, good, clean fun? And most people who go on ghost tours don't really believe in that kind of thing anyway. They just want to, learn about local history and listen to some spooky stories. And I guess, first of all, let me just make it clear, like, if you believe in ghosts or if you like going on ghost tours or whatever, like, I didn't mean anything personal by it. I didn't mean to imply that because I think that the belief in ghosts is foolish, and I'm not backing off of that. I do think that believing in ghosts as an adult is an incredibly foolish thing to do, but that doesn't mean that I think that you are automatically like a fool overall for having that belief. Lots of us, I think all of us probably in our own ways, believe in foolish things or accept foolish things, and it doesn't mean that we are all necessarily complete fools. So I just wanted to make that clear. And also, I do honestly think, when I reflect on it a little, that part of the reason that I do feel as strongly about it as I do, and that I do take such a harsh attitude toward ghost tours and belief in the supernatural, is because of the personal connection that I have to it. I have had an uncle, and actually, technically, he wasn't my uncle. He was my dad's cousin, but we all just called him my uncle because, the age difference. And that's a thing that people with large extended families do a lot, and really it's nothing that you should read too much into. I called him my uncle. He technically wasn't, and he was like really almost a second father to me when I was growing up. He would babysit for me and my brother when my parents had to go out and do something and my grandparents weren't available. And, he was Uncle Job, my Uncle Job. And he worked at a funeral home. He was a mortician. He was a licensed mortician, and eventually he got to be the funeral director at this place that he worked. He worked at this funeral home in our hometown. It was an on-site funeral home where they would prepare the dead and have funerals, and then it was attached to a cemetery as well, so people could come there and they could have their funeral services, and then also they could be buried right there at the same location. So I guess it was kind of a one-stop shop. I'm not sure if that's how they marketed it or not, but he worked there for a long, long time. And despite having that occupation and working in that sort of morbid environment, he was always a really cheerful guy, a really normal, happy, just cheerful guy. And sometimes I would ask him, when I got old enough to learn what he did for a living and to realize what it meant, sometimes I would ask him, like, what's the appeal? Why do you work at a funeral home? Why are you a mortician? Like, what's the appeal of that job? And he told me, well, the customers never complain, although unfortunately it is a dying business. And he was just a really good role model for me. And then over time, as I grew up and as he grew older, things started to change. His personality started to shift. He was more distracted than he used to be, and his thoughts on the world in general just became grim, became a lot darker than they used to be. And I came to know that he had developed this fascination with the supernatural, with the paranormal. He came to believe in things like spirits and ghosts. He came to believe that when he would be preparing a corpse for a funeral, that the spirit of that person would be in the room with him and that he could commune with it and speak to it. And this all made him very depressed and just a very dark and grim person that he never was before. And he started telling us these stories, these fantastical stories that seemed to indicate that he was having these delusions. He was living this to him incredibly realistic fantasy world. And I mean, eventually we started to kind of appeal to him. Like, you should see a doctor about this. You should talk to somebody. You should see a counselor or a psychiatrist. Maybe there's some underlying issue here that can be corrected with counseling or medication or something. But he wouldn't hear it because to him, these things that he was experiencing, these voices he was hearing, these conversations that he was having with these spirits, with these ghosts, were incredibly real. They came to be just as real for him as the actual living people in his life, his family, his friends. And he gradually became alienated from his family and his friends as the years went on. And his interest in this area just got deeper and deeper and more intractable. And eventually it became incompatible with the rest of his life. He wound up actually losing his job. He worked so hard for so many years to get the job of funeral director at this place where he worked. And eventually they had to let him go because he stopped coming into work. He would disappear for days at a time. And when he showed back up, they would ask, "Where have you been? Why haven't you been to work? Why haven't you called anyone? Why haven't we heard from you in so many, however long it was, days, sometimes weeks?" And he would say, "I guess I just lost track of time at the ghost bar." He started telling people that he was hanging out at a ghost bar. And when you pressed him for details, it sounded like exactly what you would think it was when you hear the term ghost bar. He believed he was going to a bar that was operated and mostly patronized by ghosts. And he said that they usually didn't allow living people to go into the ghost bar and be a customer, but because he was who he was, because he was a funeral director and a mortician, and because he had always been so kind to the dead and so respectful, and because he knew them so well and they knew him, that they granted him a rare admittance. It was so rare for a living person to be granted admittance to the ghost bar. And so he started spending almost all of his time there, except for reappearing every few days to eat or change clothes or do some other errand or some other job that he couldn't do while he was at the ghost bar. And we never found out where this ghost bar was. We never found out exactly where he was going or what he was doing. Was it all completely in his head? Was he going to an actual bar with actual people and he was just hallucinating that these people were ghosts? We never found out because our only source of information was Uncle Job himself. I mean, it was sad. He began to sort of drift further and further away from us and waste away. And eventually there came a time when he just vanished. Nobody heard from him anymore after that. We still don't know exactly what happened to him. It was so long ago, and he was of such an age when he did finally disappear from us that we all assumed that whatever happened, he's long dead now. I remember the last conversation I had with him, and I was a teenager at the time, but I was understanding of what was going on and of the seriousness of his condition, whatever it was. And I remember talking to him about the ghost bar, and it was similar to the conversations we used to have when I was younger about him working as a mortician, where I asked him, what was the appeal, I asked him, I said, "Uncle Job, what is so great about this ghost bar that you keep going to? Why can't you just stop? Why can't you just stop going to the ghost bar?" And he looked me right in the face and he said, "I've tried, but I'm just hooked on the booze."